Inside the Hidden Kingdom by Jessica Maxwell from Audubon.
The Himalayas cut the lapis horizon like the mandible of the mountain gods. The Himalayas. I talked my way into the cockpit of our small jet to get a better look. "That is Everest," said our Bhutanese pilot. Like nearly everyone younger than 40 in Bhutan, he speaks the Queen's English. "That is Kanchenjunga, the third highest peak in the world. And that is our own Jumulhari, only 5,000 feet less than Everest. Right now, we're over Bangladesh, but once we reach those mountains," he smiled, "we're in Bhutan." Those mountains, waiting among them, fitted into a score of knife-blade river valleys as if by nature itself, lies a kingdom that has somehow managed to remain unspoiled for 1,000 years. Bhutan is still blessed with wildlife species that are extinct in many other parts of the Himalayas, and humans coexist peacefully with them. Winging across a blue silk sky toward this secret garden at the top of the world is enough to give any Westerner spiritual vertigo. On a map, Bhutan floats jewel-like and remote on the southern slopes of the eastern Himalayas. Tibet lies to the north. To the east and south is the Indian state of Assam. To the west, the state of Sikkim. Nepal lies just beyond Sikkim. The mountains have always played an impressive role in preserving Bhutan's rich native culture and its extravagant natural beauty. They made invasion nearly impossible, helping Bhutan maintain the distinction of being the last independent Himalayan Buddhist kingdom, the only one that has not been absorbed by China or India or colonized by Europeans. To this day, the Bhutanese believe that proper daily worship of the mountain deities protects them from evil. Now the mountains and their swift, steep rivers have begun to provide Bhutan with the cash source it needs to enter the 21st century with minimal damage to its environment. More hydroelectric power than you can shake a cell phone at. Almost all of it produced by run-of-the-river projects that use in-stream pipes to funnel water through turbines, producing electricity without dams or reservoirs. As our kamikaze landing would soon prove, the mountains still deter invaders. Even with jet-age transportation, the few tourists who venture here find traveling to Bhutan a royal challenge. I had flown 9,000 miles from Eugene, Oregon, to Bangkok, grabbed a crummy 4-hour nap in an airport hotel, then sleepwalked to a crack-of-dawn flight. Now we were dropping through the clouds toward the town of Paro, swooping alarmingly close to a mountainside and turning in hawk circles toward an airstrip that looked like a 7-Eleven parking lot. The Paro Valley is the only one in Bhutan long enough to accommodate jets. From north to south, pretty farmhouses sit astride concentric rings of terraced grain fields. To the east and west lie the mountains. Down the middle runs the onion-colored rush of the Paro-Chu River. The shriek of our turbines seemed a terrible insult to this ancient Buddhist settlement. I'd been in Bhutan just 2 minutes, and already I felt protective of its otherworldly peace. I first heard of Bhutan in 1993 from Guido Rahr, director of Portland's Wild Salmon Center, who went to the Yale School of Forestry with some of Bhutan's future conservation ministers. There were 25 countries represented in our class, he told me, but we always turned to the Bhutanese for answers. We couldn't believe how advanced they were. In 1996, my neighbors Russ and Blythe Carpenter returned from a trek in Bhutan, raving about its natural beauty and the graciousness of its people. I decided it was time to see Bhutan for myself. Now I was here, getting ready to spend 2 weeks driving across the country, looking for wildlife and interviewing those responsible for its preservation. It is no overstatement to say that preserving Bhutan's environment should be one of the highest priorities of modern conservation. Bhutan is one of the world's hotspots, places that together constitute less than 2% of the globe's surface area, but contain more than 50% of its biodiversity, says Kirk Talbot, Senior Director of the Asia-Pacific Program for the nonprofit group Conservation International, and Mingma Sherpa, Director of the World Wildlife Fund's Bhutan program for 6 years, says, Bhutan is the only country in the eastern Himalayas that still has temperate, old-growth forest in the middle hills. It has nearly 800 species of birds. It still has snow leopards, rhinos, elephants, and tigers. It has incredible potential for biological conservation. Bhutan's diversity stems from its vertical topography. In a distance of about 100 miles, its altitude drops from 24,500 feet above sea level to 900 feet. Almost 3/4 of the country, which is roughly the size of Switzerland, is forested. Musk deer, red pandas, blue sheep, slate gray actually, snow leopards, and takins, cousins of the musk oxen, inhabit Bhutan's cold northern forests. Its southern jungles are home to a host of endangered species: Bengal tigers, leopards, greater one-horned rhinoceroses, Asian elephants, golden langur monkeys, pygmy hogs, hispid hares, Himalayan black bears, pure-blooded Asiatic buffaloes, sloth bears, and 4 species of hornbills. Rare black-necked or Tibetan cranes overwinter in the central valleys. Bhutan has more than 2,000 varieties of flowering plants, including 50 species of wild rhododendron. But even challenging terrain couldn't have protected Bhutan from the past 100 years of industrial assault. What saved it was something even rarer than a snow leopard: 2 environmentally enlightened kings. Jigme Dorji Wangchuck ruled Bhutan from 1952 to 1972. His son, Jigme Singye Wangchuck, took the throne at the tender age of 17 and is still king today. Considered the father of modern Bhutan, King Dorji brought his country out of isolation in the early 1960s. A careful student of developed countries, King Dorji dearly wanted Bhutan to become a modern, economically self-reliant country. Cheered on by forward-thinking young nobles, including his own prime minister, the king initiated huge internal changes. He established the National Assembly, codified the kingdom's laws, made the judiciary independent, and abolished serfdom. In 1961, he began constructing the country's first roads. But King Dorji also foresaw the dangers that modern values posed to Bhutan's cultural and environmental integrity. So he laid out the country's first conservation policies, including the remarkable Forest Act of 1969, which banned hunting, fishing, the felling of trees, and the burning of forest. King Jigme Singye, now 43, continues his father's crusade to bring Bhutan gracefully into the new millennium. The young king's battle cry is gross national happiness, a serious governmental goal that is repeated over and over in newspaper headlines. King Jigme has made many hardline environmental decrees. For instance, only about 5,000 tourists a year are allowed into Bhutan. Nepal accepts more than 500,000, and all visits must be arranged through government-sanctioned Bhutanese travel agencies. The king is also strongly committed to keeping at least 60% of Bhutan's forests intact. A decade after the passage of his father's Forest Act, when numerous private sawmills were found to be logging indiscriminately, Jigme's government first restricted commercial logging, then nationalized the forests. The Forest and Nature Conservation Act of 1995 went further, creating strong reforestation programs and requiring permits for all trucks carrying timber. Last January, Bhutan banned the export of unprocessed logs. Land conservation is equally strict. Nearly 30% of the country has been set aside for a system of national parks and preserves that is designed to represent all of Bhutan's major ecosystems, including the formerly unprotected broadleaf forests of its central valleys. Last summer, in order to move Bhutan toward democracy, King Jigme relinquished some of his powers to the National Assembly, including the power to elect members of the king's cabinet. He also created an impressive group of policymaking bodies run by passionate young environmentalists. For instance, the National Environment Commission, the nation's chief environmental body, has to approve any new industry. But it is the nation's Buddhist traditions that have proved to be its conservation trump card. Respect for the natural world is a central tenet of Buddhism, states the preamble to the 1990 Paro Resolution on Environment and Sustainable Development. Indeed, the Buddhist belief in reincarnation makes it imperative to protect nature in this life so that it's still intact for one's next life. Bhutan's representative to the United Nations put it this way in his keynote address at a UN meeting. Man is just a sentient being, among other forms of existence. The assumption that man is on top of the chain of beings is misplaced, considering the mysterious web of interdependent relationships that is now being confirmed through scientific studies. Reality is not hierarchical, but a whole, circular, enclosed system. Sustainable development is, therefore, in the interest of every being, every day, not just in the interest of future generations. A government publication explains that compliance with environmental policies is further guaranteed by the belief that wind, water, rocks, trees, lakes, and mountains are inhabited by nature spirits who demand reverence, or else. They are believed to punish with death and disease those who disturb and pollute their domain. It all sounds too good to be true. Thus, my journey to the Dragon Kingdom, as Bhutan calls itself, felt a little like putting Shangri-La on trial. But if Bhutan is really as good as it sounds, perhaps this little Himalayan outpost can set the environmental gold standard for the 21st century. So, do you think Bhutan can save itself from the galloping rot? Thus spoke Peter Beard, the renowned photographer who was assigned to record our Bhutan expedition. A part-time resident of Nairobi, Kenya, Beard has spent 40 years documenting Africa's environmental disaster caused by poaching, drought, and habitat destruction. He and Peter Tunney, his manager and the owner of a New York City gallery, had just arrived from the Paro airport, Beard wearing a navy blue crewneck sweater and a sarong. The Peters had been escorted by Ugan Rinzin, the dashing owner of Yongfeld Travel, who had arranged our tour. They caught up with me and Tashi T.G. Gelber, our guide, in the dining room of the Druk Shirig Hotel in downtown Thimphu, Bhutan's capital. We were enjoying a tasty supper of yak meat, French fries, fresh peas, and red rice, the delicious, naturally rosy national staple. "Long flight," Beard announced. "Had a run-in with an elephant recently. Better go lie down." 2 years before, in Kenya, an angry female elephant had crushed Beard's pelvis. It amazed everyone that he survived. Fortunately, so had his love of photographing big game. Unfortunately, there would be no rhinos and tigers and bears on this trip. Bhutan's southern jungles are off-limits to tourists due to a dangerous political situation on its unfenced 450-mile border with India. There would be no snow leopards either. The big, shy cats live at such extreme altitudes that even trekkers rarely see them, though they do routinely spot the silvery blurs of Bhutan's blue sheep, which would also be out of our range. And since it was November, the Himalayan black bears would be hibernating. We did have the possibility of observing the mammals of the cold temperate forests at 10,000 to 12,500 feet, including musk deer, the laboring takin, the moose-like jura, and my favorite, Bhutan's adorable red panda, which looks like a cinnamon-colored cross between a koala bear and a raccoon. We also expected to catch some interesting bird life, and we were assured of viewing Bhutan's fabulous black-necked cranes, which had already begun to arrive in the marshlands near the village of Gante, our final stop before returning to Thimphu. It is very difficult to see wildlife in Bhutan, Ugin warned us. The reason is a happy one: the lack of roads. Due to the construction challenges of its mountainous terrain, Bhutan's villages are linked by a single, twisting, one-lane road. With 46,500 square miles of country to wander around in, why should a wild animal hang out by the road? We do have a fungus that you might find interesting, Ugin offered. It's half plant, half animal. Really, it's a worm that has a fungus growing out of its head. Eventually, the fungus takes over the worm. It's called Yarsagumba, or summer plant, winter worm. People pay a lot of money to use it in traditional Tibetan medicine. On that note, we all retired to our rooms, hoping for continued health as we readied our weary Western selves for the upcoming road trip. If you're from America's West Coast, you wake up naturally at 5 a.m. in Bhutan. This bit of international time zone mojo offers you a magnificent collection of sunrises, framed by the twin canine skylines of whichever mountain valley you happen to awake in. That first morning, dawn broke in a glossy magenta yaktail pattern, flaring sideways across the sky. By 9, we were on our way to Punaha, the first village on our itinerary. Our land cruiser looped its way along paperclip curves expertly executed by Searing, our gentle driver. The few other vehicles we passed took each turn as cautiously as Searing did. Given the alpine abyss just beyond the road, this was reassuring. It did not, however, remove the potential for motion sickness, which soon rendered Peter Tunney chartreuse and asleep in the front seat. "Only beauty can save the world," Peter Beard announced, glancing out at the deepening green around us. Then he too shut his eyes. Abandoned, I scouted the territory for possible wildlife. Half an hour later, I made our first sighting. Wild boar! Sure enough, a small black ridgeback pig of some sort crossed the road, then trotted up a hill. Within seconds, a barefoot Peter Beard was on its tail, snapping photos as he went. The nervous little swine zigged and zagged in an effort to lose him, but Beard tracked his quarry's every move until it vanished in the underbrush with an annoyed grunt. We were thrilled with this fortuitous debut. "I'm sorry to tell you," TG informed us once we were underway again, "but that was a domestic pig. We have many like it." What a shame. Wild boars are a regular part of the scenery in Bhutan. They are also one of the country's more serious environmental problems. The cause is a predator-prey imbalance, according to Sangay Wangchuk, the eloquent director of the Nature Conservation section of Bhutan's Ministry of Agriculture. 20 years ago, there were no problems with wild boars, he had told me over dinner in Thimphu. We had wild dogs, and the wild dog attacks the wild boar's young, so the population was kept in check. But we also had a wild dog problem. They were killing the cattle, so farmers were allowed to poison them. Then suddenly we find we have a wild boar problem, all over Bhutan. How do they plan to bring the wild dogs back? We've simply stopped poisoning them. Wangchuk expects the wild boar population to stabilize in 5 to 15 years. Bhutan has other environmental problems as well. Overgrazing is a serious issue, which